Jamal was on a ladder, halfway up the side of his new townhouse, tightening a small screw on the internet box. He had just moved into the quiet neighborhood 2 days ago. Boxes were still everywhere inside, but today was for fixing the Wi-Fi. The signal kept dropping, and it was driving him crazy. It was a sunny afternoon. The kind of day where birds chirped, kids rode bikes, and everyone seemed to mind their own business. Everyone, except the woman across the street. She stood on her porch with her arms crossed, sipping from a mug and staring at Jamal like he had just landed from another planet. Jamal didn't notice at first. He had his earbuds in, some chill music playing while he worked. He wore gym shorts, a plain hoodie, and sneakers. Nothing out of the ordinary. Just a regular guy trying to get his internet to work. He unscrewed the panel on the utility box, checking the cables and connection. It was something he had done before in his last apartment when tech support took too long. He was used to fixing things himself. Meanwhile, the woman, her name was Karen, though Jamal didn't know it yet, was getting more suspicious by the second. She leaned forward, squinting. She didn't recognize him. And in her world, not recognizing someone was enough of a reason to call the police. "He's messing with wires," she muttered, reaching for her phone. "He's probably trying to steal Wi-Fi or cut someone's cable. Maybe he's even trying to break in." She wasn't whispering. Her voice carried, loud enough for the neighbor's dog to bark and for a jogger passing by to glance over awkwardly. Jamal was still focused on the panel, adjusting a tiny cable with a screwdriver, humming along to his playlist. He had no idea that across the street, a 911 call was being made. "Hello, yes, I'd like to report suspicious activity," Karen said to the dispatcher. "There's a man messing with some sort of utility box on the side of a house. Yes, a black man. I don't think he lives there. He's wearing a hoodie. No, I didn't speak to him. I'm just watching from my porch." The dispatcher asked a few more questions and said officers would be sent to check it out. Karen hung up, satisfied. She had done her duty, she thought. She had protected the neighborhood. Back on the ladder, Jamal finally got the connection steady. The blinking light turned solid green. Success. He climbed down, unplugged his earbuds, and wiped some sweat from his forehead. He was just about to go back inside when he heard something. Car doors closing. He turned around and saw a police car pulling up. 2 officers stepped out and started walking toward him. Jamal froze, confused. Can I help you?" Jamal had no idea what was going on. As he stood there, trying to make sense of the situation, the 2 officers walked up to him. One of them was a man with a serious face, his hands resting on his belt. The other was a woman, who gave Jamal a quick once-over before looking at her partner. "Sir, can we talk to you for a minute?" the male officer asked. Jamal blinked, still confused. Sure. What's this about?" he asked, wiping his hands on his hoodie. He glanced at the police car and then at the officers. The woman officer stepped forward. "We got a call about suspicious activity. We were told you were messing with a utility box on the side of the house." Jamal blinked again, trying to process what was happening. "Yeah, I'm just fixing my Wi-Fi," he explained, pointing to the box. "I just moved in, and the internet wasn't working right. So I thought I'd try to fix it myself." The officers exchanged a quick look. The man nodded, clearly seeing that Jamal was calm and polite. "Okay, but we still need to check a few things. Can you show us some ID?" Jamal was getting a little frustrated, but he tried to stay calm. He pulled out his wallet and handed over his driver's license. "Look, I just moved in a couple days ago. My name's Jamal Williams. I live here now," he said, trying to keep things clear. The officers took the ID and looked it over for a moment. "Okay, we're just doing our job," the male officer said, his voice a little softer now. "We've had some complaints about people tampering with neighborhood utilities." Jamal felt his shoulders relax a bit. Maybe this was all just a misunderstanding. He had seen cops in his old neighborhood before. They didn't always have the best reputation, but he didn't think anything bad would come from this. Then, just as things seemed to settle, Karen appeared from across the street. She walked briskly toward the group, her eyes locked on Jamal. "Officers," she called, her voice sharp. "I told you, he's not supposed to be here. He's been messing with wires all day. I'm telling you, he's not from this neighborhood." The officers turned to Karen, and Jamal could see her eyes were narrowed, almost like she was trying to be helpful. But to him, it seemed more like she was trying to make him look guilty. "Ma'am, we've already spoken with him," the female officer said politely. "He's just fixing his Wi-Fi. He lives here." But Karen wasn't backing down. "You can't just let him walk away. He's probably using a fake name or something. I know he's not supposed to be here," she insisted. Jamal felt a little heat rise in his chest. Why was she so sure about him? He was just trying to get his internet to work. But before he could say anything, the officers turned back to him, looking a bit uncertain. "Sir, we'll need to check a few more things, just to be thorough," the male officer said. Jamal's heart sank. It wasn't over yet. The officers didn't give Jamal a chance to respond before they started asking more questions. He could tell they were just doing their job, but the whole thing was getting more and more awkward. The woman officer took a step back and pulled out a small notepad, scribbling something down. The male officer, still holding Jamal's driver's license, asked him to step away from the utility box for a moment. Jamal reluctantly agreed, though he couldn't help but feel like things were getting out of hand. "We just need to run a quick check, sir. It won't take long," the male officer said, his tone steady but firm. "You can go ahead and take a look, but I swear I'm not doing anything wrong," Jamal replied, trying to stay calm. He didn't understand why this was happening. Sure, he was a little frustrated that he had to deal with cops instead of getting his Wi-Fi fixed, but he knew arguing wouldn't help. His hands were still slightly shaky, but he did his best to stay composed. He glanced over at Karen, who was standing across the street with a look of satisfaction on her face, like she was certain that she'd just caught him in the act. "Are you sure you're supposed to be here?" Karen called out loudly, making sure to get everyone's attention. "He doesn't even look like he belongs in this neighborhood." The male officer sighed and turned to her. "Ma'am, we've already checked his ID. He lives here. You can't just call the police on someone for fixing their own Wi-Fi." Karen didn't seem convinced. She folded her arms tightly, still glaring at Jamal. "You guys better double-check. This doesn't seem right to me. I'm just trying to protect the neighborhood," she insisted, her voice a bit too loud. Jamal's patience was starting to wear thin. He could feel his face getting warm, but he didn't want to snap at her. He just wanted to get through this. The male officer turned to his partner, who was still taking notes, and muttered something under his breath. After a few moments, he looked back at Jamal and nodded. "All right, we'll do a quick background check, just to make sure everything's in order," the officer said. Jamal gave a stiff nod, not knowing what else to say. He couldn't understand why this was happening to him. It wasn't like he was doing anything wrong. He was just a guy trying to fix his internet. He watched as the female officer typed something into her radio, probably checking his information against their records. The tension in the air felt thick, like the whole neighborhood was watching to see what would happen next. Jamal felt his heart race as the silence stretched on. He couldn't believe this was his welcome to the neighborhood. The officers were taking their time, looking over the details, and he couldn't shake the feeling that Karen had somehow made things worse. Finally, the female officer turned to her partner, looking slightly puzzled. She said something to him quietly, and he nodded, glancing at Jamal again. The moments felt like hours. Just when Jamal thought he might lose his patience entirely, the officer spoke again. "Sir, do you mind if we check a few more things?" the officer asked, his voice a little more serious this time. Jamal wasn't sure if he should be more frustrated or just exhausted by the whole situation. He was standing there, trying his best to stay calm, while the officers fumbled through their radios and walked around, clearly trying to figure out what was going on. Every now and then, he glanced over at Karen, who was still standing on her porch with her arms crossed, eyes glued to him. He could see her face full of disbelief, like she was waiting for him to make a mistake. "Sir, we've checked your ID, and everything seems fine," the male officer finally said, turning back to Jamal. "But we still need to confirm a few things just to be thorough. You understand, right?" Jamal didn't know if he was supposed to be relieved or even more suspicious. Everything seemed to be checking out, yet they were still making him go through more steps. He nodded slowly, trying to stay patient. "Yeah, sure," he said, his voice a little flat. "I get it." The officers stood nearby, talking quietly to each other as they checked his details against their system. Jamal couldn't hear most of their conversation, but he could feel the tension in the air, thick and heavy. Karen hadn't said anything in a while, but he could tell she was still watching closely, waiting for something, anything, that would make her right about him. "All right, sir," the female officer said after what felt like an eternity, breaking the silence. "We've run the details. Everything seems clear." She paused for a moment, glancing at her partner before continuing. "It looks like you do live here, and you're just trying to fix your Wi-Fi like you said." Jamal was trying to keep his face neutral, but inside he couldn't help but feel a small wave of relief. Finally, maybe this whole mess was about to be over. "Thank you," he said, letting out a slow breath. He started to relax, his shoulders easing, ready to get back to fixing the Wi-Fi. At least it seemed like the officers were going to leave him alone now. But before he could even start walking back to the utility box, Karen stepped forward again, blocking his path. She didn't seem to notice how uncomfortable everyone else was getting. "You know," she said loudly, her voice carrying across the street, "he could still be lying. Just because he has an ID doesn't mean anything. People use fake names all the time." Jamal couldn't believe it. Had she really not given up yet? He felt a hot flush of frustration rise in his chest, but he bit his lip and held back from saying anything. He didn't want to escalate things further. The male officer turned to Karen, his patience now wearing thin. "Ma'am, we've done a full check. He's fine. There's nothing more to investigate here." "But," Karen started, her voice shaking with what seemed to be a mix of anger and confusion. She took a step closer, practically shaking her finger at Jamal. "I saw him messing with wires. You don't just walk around and do that without a reason." The female officer stepped forward, her tone firmer now. "Ma'am, we understand your concern, but there's nothing suspicious about what he's doing. He's not breaking the law. Please step back." But Karen wasn't backing down. "You're making a mistake," she shouted, her voice high-pitched. "I know something's off. You're just letting him go." The officers exchanged a look. They were clearly frustrated, but they had done their job. The situation was supposed to be over. Yet here they were, still caught in the middle of it. "Ma'am," the female officer said again, this time with more finality. "You need to go back to your house. There's nothing else to see here." Despite the officer's words, Karen didn't move. She stood there, arms crossed tightly, her eyes locked on Jamal. It was clear she wasn't going to back down without a fight. The officers looked at each other for a moment, then back at Jamal. The tension in the air was growing thick, and Jamal felt his patience starting to fray again. He just wanted to fix his Wi-Fi and move on with his day. The male officer cleared his throat, glancing at the woman officer. "You know what? Let's just double-check a couple of things. Just to be sure," he said, almost as if to reassure Karen, though Jamal could tell the officer was a bit fed up with the whole situation too. Jamal's stomach sank. He had thought they were done with this. He had shown them his ID, explained what he was doing, and even invited them inside to check the rest of the house. But now, they wanted to double-check. This was starting to feel more like a hassle than anything else. Still, he didn't argue. He figured if they wanted to check a few more things, he'd let them. "Fine," Jamal said, his voice a little tight. "Go ahead, but this is getting ridiculous." The female officer nodded and took out a small device, typing something into it. The male officer pulled out his radio again, speaking quietly into it. Jamal could hear a few beeps and clicks as they ran his name through the system once more, checking his background. He stood there, his arms hanging by his sides, trying to ignore the heat in his face. He knew there was no reason for them to still be checking him, but he didn't want to make things worse. After a few long moments, the male officer spoke again. "Sir, can you tell us if you've ever been involved with any government security work? Any cybersecurity stuff?" Jamal's eyebrows shot up in surprise. Yeah, actually," he said, thinking back to his old job. "I used to work in cybersecurity for a government agency. That's kind of why I know how to fix this stuff." The officers looked at each other, and Jamal could see the wheels turning in their heads. They clearly hadn't expected that answer. The female officer quickly made a note in her pad while the male officer stepped closer. "So, you're saying you've worked in cybersecurity?" the officer asked. "Is there a reason you're setting up Wi-Fi stuff around here?" Jamal nodded, feeling the weight of their questions. "I've been tracking some signals in this area. I used to work on a team that tracked suspicious Wi-Fi activity and even illegal surveillance in neighborhoods like this one. So when I saw my signal wasn't working, I figured I'd just make sure everything was in order." The officer's eyes widened as Jamal spoke. They hadn't expected this kind of answer, especially from someone who seemed so calm and normal. Jamal wasn't some random guy trying to steal Wi-Fi. He was tracking signals that might be coming from somewhere in the neighborhood. "So you're saying there's a possibility that someone around here is doing something illegal with Wi-Fi?" the female officer asked, her tone now more curious than suspicious. Jamal nodded. "Yeah, I was actually trying to track a suspicious signal that's been popping up in this neighborhood. That's why I've been looking around, trying to fix things." The male officer glanced at his partner, then back at Jamal. "This is a little unusual, but we'll need to check this out." Just when Jamal thought the situation was crazy enough, the officers started talking about a deeper investigation. His mind raced. There was a hidden problem in the neighborhood, and it was bigger than he could have imagined. The officers were no longer focused on Jamal like before. Now they were more interested in what he had just said about the strange Wi-Fi signals. Their faces had changed, from suspicion to curiosity. Jamal could tell they were starting to take him seriously. "What do you mean by suspicious signals?" the female officer asked, taking a step closer. Jamal pulled out his phone and opened a tracking app he used from his cybersecurity days. "I noticed some strange traffic on my network when I first moved in," he explained. "At first, I thought it was just interference, but then I realized there was a hidden network, something masked, not a normal home connection." He handed the phone to the officers so they could see for themselves. The screen showed a few signals in the area, one of which was labeled unknown, encrypted. The signal strength was strong, which meant it was nearby. Very nearby. "See this one?" Jamal pointed. "That's the signal. It's not coming from my house, and it's not something a regular router would put out. It's bouncing data every few minutes, but it's protected, like someone doesn't want it traced." The male officer's eyebrows rose. "Could it be from a neighbor?" Jamal nodded. "That's what I was trying to figure out before Karen called the cops on me." Both officers turned and looked around the street. Everything looked normal. Quiet homes, clean lawns, a few cars parked in driveways. Nothing seemed out of place. But that was the thing about tech. Danger didn't always look dangerous. "What kind of danger are we talking here?" the female officer asked, lowering her voice a little. "Depends," Jamal said. "Could be someone stealing data, spying on neighbors, even running illegal stuff through a hidden network. I've seen it before." The male officer's face turned serious. "So you were actually trying to stop something illegal, and we thought you were the one causing trouble." Jamal gave a tired smile. "Yeah. Funny how that works, right?" Before anyone could say more, Karen walked over again. "What's going on? What is he telling you now?" she asked, clearly annoyed that they were listening to Jamal. The female officer held up a hand. "Ma'am, please go back inside. We're looking into something more serious now." "More serious?" Karen repeated, confused. "I told you he was acting strange." Jamal turned toward her calmly. "You were so focused on me, you didn't stop to think maybe I was trying to protect this neighborhood." Karen didn't respond. She just stared at him, clearly unsure what to say. The male officer turned to Jamal. "Can you help us track where it's coming from?" Jamal nodded. "Yeah, but we'll have to walk a little. The signal's moving, but I've got tools to follow it." "Then let's find out what's really going on here," the officer said, now fully on board. What started as a misunderstanding was quickly turning into something much bigger. Jamal walked ahead with his phone in hand, the two officers following close behind. The signal tracker on his screen kept blinking, pointing them toward a house just a few doors down from his. It was a quiet-looking place, not much different from the others. Blue shutters, clean driveway, and a small porch with a chair and some plants. Nothing about it screamed danger. "This is the house," Jamal said, stopping on the sidewalk in front of it. "The signal is the strongest here. It's been bouncing back and forth from somewhere inside." The officers exchanged a quick glance. The female officer stepped forward and knocked on the door. They waited for a minute. No answer. "Does anyone live here?" she asked Jamal. "I've seen someone come and go a few times," Jamal replied. "Usually at night, never during the day." The male officer walked around to the side of the house, peeking through the fence. After a few seconds, he came back and said, "There's a bunch of cables running into the garage from the side. Definitely not normal wiring for a regular house." Just then, a faint clicking sound came from Jamal's phone. The tracker beeped again, louder this time. The signal had spiked. "It's active now," Jamal said, holding up the phone. "Someone inside is using the hidden network." The officers looked at each other again. The female officer grabbed her radio and called for backup, just to be safe. They didn't want to go in alone if this turned out to be something serious. As they waited, Karen stood a few houses back, still watching everything with wide eyes. Her arms were no longer crossed. Now she looked a little nervous, maybe even guilty. Within minutes, another patrol car pulled up. Two more officers got out and were quickly filled in on the situation. They all moved together toward the garage door, careful and alert. "Stand back," the male officer told Jamal. "We'll take it from here." Jamal nodded but stayed close enough to keep an eye on the tracker. The signal was still going strong. Whoever was inside hadn't stopped. The officers knocked on the garage door. No answer. They tried again. Still nothing. "We may need to get a warrant if they don't respond," one of the backup officers said. "But if we can hear or see anything illegal through the windows, we might have cause to investigate further." Jamal pointed to a small window on the side of the garage. "You might be able to see something through there." One officer walked over and peered inside. After a moment, he turned back with a serious look. Computers. A lot of them. Racks and wires everywhere. Definitely not just someone working from home. Everyone tensed up. This was no longer just about Jamal fixing his Wi-Fi. They had stumbled onto something much bigger, something hidden in plain sight. "We need to get inside," the lead officer said, stepping back and making the call for immediate clearance. The mystery house was no longer just suspicious. It was the center of something far more serious than anyone had guessed. As soon as the officers got clearance, they moved quickly. One of them carefully opened the garage door while the others stood ready. Jamal stood back on the sidewalk, watching closely. The signal on his phone was now blinking fast. It was clear that whatever was inside the garage had just gone active again. The garage door creaked open, and the officers stepped in. Inside, the space looked more like a small tech lab than a normal garage. There were computer towers stacked on shelves, wires hanging from the ceiling, and blinking lights everywhere. A fan buzzed loudly in the corner, trying to cool down all the machines. It looked like something out of a spy movie. "What the heck is all this?" one officer muttered as he walked inside. Jamal could see the shock on their faces. He slowly stepped closer, staying behind the officers. "This is way more than just Wi-Fi problems," he said. "This is a full setup. Someone's running something big here." They found hard drives, routers, and even cameras inside. One of the computers had screens open with maps, data logs, and strange codes. It didn't take long before one of the officers found something that made everyone pause. "Guys," he said, holding up a document from the desk, "these logs show access to people's home networks, like spying on their smart devices." Another officer added, "This might be a hacking hub. They're using other people's Wi-Fi, collecting info, and maybe even stealing identities." Jamal shook his head. "This is what I was tracking. Someone's been collecting private data from houses around here, even mine." As the officers continued searching, one of them found a small folder labeled video feeds. Inside were clips from people's security cameras, baby monitors, and even computers. It was clear now. This wasn't just a tech setup. It was a serious crime scene. Just then, a car pulled into the driveway. The driver, a man in his 30s, stepped out with a confused look. As soon as he saw the police in his garage, he froze. "Hands where we can see them," the officer shouted. The man didn't run. He just looked stunned. Within seconds, the man was in handcuffs. They found IDs on him that didn't match his name, and a bag with cash and unmarked flash drives. Everything pointed to something illegal, something big. Jamal stood quietly as the police took the man away. The neighborhood, which had been calm just hours ago, was now buzzing with lights, radios, and questions. Karen, who had been standing outside watching it all, slowly walked over to Jamal. For the first time, she looked unsure. I didn't know," she said softly. "I thought." Jamal didn't say much. He just gave a small nod. Sometimes we see what we expect instead of what's really there. The officers came back to thank him. If he hadn't tracked that signal, they might never have found the setup. That day, Jamal didn't just fix his Wi-Fi. He helped uncover something dangerous, right in his own neighborhood. And maybe, just maybe, some people learned a lesson they'd never forget.